where the Warriors are sitting now after 6 rounds, you have to say that they're probably a chance of making the 8. If you have a look at their back 3, the way they carried that ball back and the way that the impact they had off the bench to keep the momentum going through that first half, it was relentless.
It could have blown out to 80 points or 70 points, and I suppose it's grateful that it didn't. But the fact the game was over after 24 minutes, I thought at 24-0. They just blew us off the park.
People don't like listening to what me and you have got to say because we've got an opinion. So we're not giving you a Warriors view, we're giving you some realistic statistics.
DSPN, the Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
It's BLT Big League Tuesday and he's back. The former Warriors coach, very proud Kiwi, 25 games for our country, played professional league in both hemispheres. Tony Kemp, welcome.
Great to be back, Marty. Had a nice little holiday in Fiji and, recovered, had an ear operation. Anyone think I was an old footballer, mate, falling to pieces like I am?
It's an old surfing operation, isn't it?
Well, coming from Taranaki, mate, all those years of in that cold water down there. I remember jumping in the water. Remember Fitzroy River, the Wawakai?
Oh, yeah.
Jumping in there, heading out to Wawakai for a surf. And
freezing,
we
mate.
we used to think a wetsuit was a singlet from the freezing works. So you chuck that on because you're warm getting in, but there was like a sack that you're wearing. And honestly, never found anything cold as I have down there. But old injury. Bit of bone growing, got a bit infected, had to get it out. So not a nice little
that's coming
operation.
straight off the mountain. So in terms of that 45, that Surf Coast Highway, did you do Coomera Patch around there? Did you do that?
All of those spots down there, and more. Other spots that people don't hear of.
Because there's some rock surfing there, isn't it? Where you got to be pretty bloody careful.
Well, it's all volcanic, isn't it? So it's all pretty rocky down there. There's Aokura, there's a bit of sand on the beach there. A nice little break down there, Otaroa, which is my local break at home. There's a sandbar right behind the Motunui there, which, if you get the right swell, it's nice there. But everyone talks about Stent Road, but there's a forest of waves down there, mate. Stent Road's only one of them. That's the famous one.
And what about at Waitara with the river bar, mate? Was it locals only? Because every time I used to go down there with a mate, they used to look at us and go, no, I never surfed, by the way, but I was always just hanging out with a mate, and it was always like you had to know somebody to actually get, no, it wasn't permission, but you just had to make sure that
Well, it's quite funny, Marty. When I went to England, I'd been away for 14 years, and I come back and I went for a surf down home in Waitara and pulled up my flash car, and all the boys were looking at my car. The kids, I didn't know them. I'd been gone for 14, 15 years. I looked at them, I said, if anything happens to my car, I'm coming looking for you boys, eh? And they sort of knew. They went, oh, he must be local. But you wouldn't show up at the local break. It was pretty territorial. And when I was a kid, you were always looking down at the beach, you're checking the wind, and if you saw a bellow of black smoke, it meant that someone had surfed where they weren't meant to be surfing, and they'd wait till they get in and they'd take the board off them, and they'd build a little bonfire out of the driftwood there and put their board in the middle of the fire. And I don't know if you've ever seen a surfboard on fire, but it goes up like black smoke bellowing from that fiberglass everywhere. So
that was there, right? Okay,
we'd all race down there to see who was in trouble.
Tone, the Warriors got thrashed, and I just want to make the point to get it out of the way, because you can sit here and you can mope about it, you can come up with excuses about it. I began the show by saying the positives for me aren't from that game. The positives for me are after 6 rounds being sixth in the table, because you earn that. You don't get given that. And sandwiched between a really bad performance against the Raiders and a shocker against Melbourne with 3 really good wins. So first and foremost, we've got to dissect what happened on the weekend, because this is going to happen also. It's no excuse, but it's going to happen throughout the season. Teams are getting belted. Apart from the Doggies, everyone's losing games, right?
Yeah, and that's really good, Marty. And you can't make a prediction at the beginning of the year. And like I said to you, right in pre-season, you give them 6 rounds.
That's exactly what you said. Just
to see how they're shaping up. And you've got to say, they're sitting in the 8, and the way that the competition's gone, who would have thought that the Western Tigers would be sitting in the 8? You know what I mean? So it's a good opportunity to see 6 rounds go past, see how the teams are shaping up. One thing, I texted you the other night, all the teams have been pretty lucky with injuries. Most of the teams that are sitting at the top, they're injury-free at the moment. You lose a player the calibre of Fisher Harris on the weekend. You lose some real sting in the middle of the park. He's one of their captains. He's a leader. That wasn't the reason why they lost the game. But, you go through round 6, through Origin, through to the back end of the season, what you need to now I guess contain is your injury status. You don't want to lose too many good players to injury, and you want to maintain the momentum, especially going into the Origin. You know, you've got to argue that you may lose Mitch Barnett. There's talk about Wade Egan again playing there. Is there any other smokies? Who knows? But generally, where the Warriors are sitting now after 6 rounds, you have to say that they're probably a chance of making the 8.
Yeah.
Given the
which
fact,
is great news. Yeah.
You know, who would have thought that Penrith Panthers would be 5-1? You know,
look, I had a message actually said to us on the podcast last week. A guy, I absolutely loved it. He said, you know, you're the worst league person talking. He said, you don't know anything. He said, you get everything wrong. He said, you know, you talked about this and the Warriors are ahead. I said, you're exactly right, mate. I'm a moron. You know, the fact that I missed Penrith losing 5 games in a row, I'm an absolute idiot. You know, I mean, but this is what this competition is, isn't it? Who would know? I'm looking down the bottom of the table, and there they are, 1-5, which is why I wanted to start with by saying the Warriors are in 6th. So bank that to start with. Let's go back to that game, though. And I was just stunned at the sheer power and the pace of Melbourne. A couple of times early in that game, we had the ball. We were within metres of their line, but their defence was really staunch. They turned it over, and they just ran 80 metres on us, mate. Yeah,
there was a contact issue, definitely there. The Warriors just weren't shaping up, you know, across the board. You know, they're young blokes that have come on off the bench. They've been really good players. You know, they're enthusiastic. They give you some energy. The way they run with the ball, the try that the young boys scored the other week down the sideline.
Yep.
You know, very, very good young players, but it's the senior players that when you're starting a game against Melbourne, you have to shape up. You know, you can't allow the contact to be sort of, I'm not going to say soft because it's never soft.
One-sided, I would call it.
Well, it has to. You have to dominate the contact. Otherwise, when you look at their spine, and you've got to think that 6 rounds into the competition, when you've got the likes of Hughes, Grant, Munster, and Peppenhausen, they're starting to hit their straps.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're going to go one end, to the other side, back to the other side, mate, they're testing you all over the park, and you can see why the likes of Xavier Coots on the back of it are having some real fun. If you don't shape up in the middle, it's a simple game. If you don't shape up in the middle and you give them front foot football, then those 4 players especially will find you out. And I'm pretty sure they would have talked about this coming to the Brisbane game, is that this weekend it's from the get-go. If they don't stop the likes of Payne, Haas and Kerrigan up front, then they've got the likes again with Hunt, Reynolds and Walsh, even though they're not firing at the moment, to cause you havoc.
Yep.
In the middle of the park, they need to sort that out. And they just lost that first 40 minutes. They're 36-0.
It was over, wasn't it?
Take Jay Hughes off, you know, take Jerome Hughes. Well, smart man, Bellamy. You know, short turnaround this week for Melbourne. He's a chance of playing. We don't need you back out there with 36-0. I don't care who they are. They're not going to score 36 against Melbourne at home.
Yeah.
But it was over.
Look, and I've got the stats here for this. Run meters in the first half, 996 to 501. That was Melbourne. So it was 2-1 pretty much. 7 line breaks to none. Offloads 11-3. 22 tackles missed by the Warriors in that first half. Then you look at the second half stats, and these are irrelevant to me because it was 35-31 missed tackles in favour of the Warriors in the second half. And so I'm like you, look, and I likened it earlier in the show too. It's a game of football. If you're down 6-0 at half time, you score a couple of goals, they score another one. It's 7-3 at the end of it. You've been towed up. It doesn't, you know. The second half, you know, it didn't. It could have blown out to 80 points or 70 points, and I suppose it's grateful that it didn't. But the fact the game was over after 24 minutes, I thought at 24-0, they just blew us off the park.
Well, from a coach's point of view, he's had a conversation with his team at half time. They're down 36-0 and they've come out and arguably won the second half. So he's got some impact, hasn't he? That's what he'll be thinking.
Yeah.
And the players will be quite happy that they didn't leak another 36 points because it would have been, that is an embarrassing. But it's that first half that you really want to dissect, you know. And I thought what Melbourne did really well was right from the get-go, where they made that error from the kickoff and they had to jump the fence, so they went from offence to defence and held the Warriors out, got a penalty, went down and just they caused havoc for the next 40 minutes.
Yeah.
But that was everywhere across the park. So you might be talking about the spine, but if you have a look at their back three, the way they carried that ball back and the way that the impact they had off the bench to keep the momentum going through that first half, it was relentless.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you've got to, you know, this is the team, you know, that at the beginning of the year, get on at $4.50 when they come out.
You did too.
They've got the depth to get them through this next period through Origin and so forth, and they'll be there at the back end of the year. The thing that Bellamy will like is that even at 36 points, they didn't leak a heap of points. You know, they didn't switch off.
He
They
didn't look
still
happy,
went through
though.
the
I must
motion.
admit, in the box he didn't look happy, but he's never going
Well,
to...
he never looks happy.
No, he's never going to look happy. But, so, again, what do you do with a performance like that? Because we saw it against Canberra as well, and I thought the similarities was they were just allowed to offload Canberra the whole time in Vegas, and that's what Melbourne were doing, but they were offloading the whole time. Yet the games in between, the 3 wins in between, the Warriors have managed to shut that down. So that's the first thing, isn't it? This week you're looking at, we've got to stop these guys getting their arms free. That's got to be number one.
Well, contact's the first thing. Look, I think the senior blokes will take a rap over the knuckles here and said that their first up contact wasn't good enough at this level, and it allowed just that momentum and the likes of Hughes and them to get on the front foot and cause havoc. So, you know, this week it's really about how do we get motivated, and this is a really good conversation, Marty, because over such a long season, you've got to think, how the hell do you get up for a game week in, week out, where you're putting the energy in like you did for those 3 rounds that got you into the 8, and then maintain that for the rest of the year? Because the simple answer to that is you can't.
No, you're going
to go through ebbs and flows. You know what I mean? So you're going to go up. You're going to have some up days, and you're going to go out there and you're absolutely going to dominate. And then you're going to have games like you did against Melbourne, where you just, no matter what happens, it doesn't go your way. And I guess for the Warriors, it's about getting back on the train, back on the tracks. One thing we know, he ain't going to panic, so he ain't going to change much of the side.
Right. Yep.
He's going to have to make some changes because it's probably looks like Chances is going to play because of a HIA. And I hope the pectoral injury from Fisher Harris, for me personally, I hope it's actually torn off because he'll heal quicker. So if it's just a small tear, I've seen a number of mates that I've played with have that same issue, and they've come back and they've actually torn it, and it's gone on and on all season. So
how long is it normally away for? You're away for 8 weeks, maybe, is it?
Yeah, well, it depends. We didn't have the medicine that we do these days. You know, the stuff that they put into you as far as, you know, the hours of work to get you right. He's fit as a fiddle too. So I don't know. Look, if it's torn right off, he's probably 6 to 8 weeks, hopefully. If he doesn't need an operation, if it's just a strain and it's a tear, that's the grey area where, you know, well, does the tear heal or does he go and do it again? And from my experience watching other players that have had that injury, I tore my bicep right off, and that was the best thing that happened because it just tore off, you know. So I just let it heal, and now it's sort of half a bicep type thing. But I've got other mates that one of them tore their pectoral muscle and the other one didn't. He had a tear. And the one with the tear was off way longer than the guy who tore it.
I think Reynolds was about 12 weeks or so last year.
Yeah,
when he did
it's not a sprained ankle. It's a serious injury.
Yeah.
You don't want to lose him for too long. But this is what I'm going to right from the get-go. Like, injuries play a big part of your season, and you need a hell of a lot of luck.
Yep.
You know, so I just don't. I don't want the Warriors to lose some of their key players, you know, and Fisher Harris is their marquee signing.
Yeah. Tony, so, and just in terms of flushing the dunny and moving on, as to quote Sir Steve Hansen, there are games of sport you play where it just doesn't go your way. But again, and I started the show by saying this, and I want to keep reiterating this, the most impressive thing was, and Webby did say this after a couple of wins. He says, we were told we were crap and everything, so it did actually hurt him. It should hurt. For a start, that performance should hurt, right? I mean, you've got to be bitten by it, and you've got to be embarrassed by it, and then you've got to put it to bed and get on with it. That's so you've been there as a player and there as a coach. Is that the mentality that you're drumming now?
Oh, he would be sweeping that to the side. He you know, the biggest lesson they'll take out of it is the leaking of 36 points and the reason that happened. So they'll deal with that, but they don't want to be dwelling on it. They want to be starting to focus now on Brisbane. Brisbane are coming off a loss as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I think they're there. They're there to be beaten. They're a bloody good side, but then again, they turned in a turd, didn't they, against the Roosters on the weekend?
Yeah, so, and they're a good side when the likes of Haas and Kerrigan are having a field day. Like Payne Haas, this first 6 rounds has been outstanding.
Yeah,
you know, as a footballer.
Comp, yeah.
But if we show up like we did against Melbourne in that first 40 minutes, they're capable, Brisbane, of doing the same thing. Personally, I don't think that'll happen. I think what they addressed post-game after the game against Melbourne was their defence.
Yep.
You can't win a competition when you're leaking 36 points. And look, you listen to what Penrith have talked about after their 5 losses. You know, it hasn't been we can't score tries. It's been about we built this monopoly of premierships on defence. Yeah. So I think they'll address the defensive deficiencies, especially the senior players, especially the middle of the park, and they'll come out and they'll be a lot more fired up on the weekend. Can they hold them over that period without the likes of Chance at the back? Because Tolpiki will probably go back there. Haven't got Roger, haven't got
Dallin still. No.
You've got a lot of senior blokes out, but you know, on the other hand, you look at these young blokes coming in now. every one of them has come in has been probably the best player on the park.
Yeah, they have. They've given, as you say, a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm. They're playing without fear.
Yeah, so they're capable of bouncing back.
I hope so. Yeah.
And I think, the way that Webster showed in the beginning of the year with that loss against Canberra, he didn't panic. He put his faith back in his team. Everyone was calling for changes, including myself, and he just said, look, they were telling us we weren't any good.
But you also, in your defence, also said after 6 weeks. And I'm happy with that after 6 weeks. I said right at the start, I'm very happy if this team makes the 8 at the end of the season. The Warriors, to me, on paper, are not a top 4 side at the moment. I want to be surprised by that, and I'm happy to get egg on my face, if I'm proved wrong at the end of it. But a top 8 side, and as I said, you have to earn that. So,
look, Marty, I just want to say this. People don't like listening to what me and you have got to say because we've got an opinion, and it's not colour-coded with polarised.
Well, I'm not paid by the club to be promotional.
It's not Kool-Aid, mate, so we're not giving you a Warriors view. We're giving you some realistic statistics. Like, I listened to Lowy the other week. Why would you argue with Lowy? Like, I'm going to give you an example here of people that have attacked Lowy, who's coached the NRL, who's been a CEO of the NRL, who's owned an NRL club, arguably the best coach in New Zealand, and arguably the best coach in England, and has an opinion. And it was making total sense to me. But
it was an opinion. That's all it was.
And a lot of people went after Lowy. The thing about that, when you say, well, he's too old and he's irrelevant and he's out of the game, I can say the same thing about Wayne Bennett.
Well, even Bellyache, how old's he, mate? He's in his 70s, isn't he?
You can't use age, and you can't. What I'm trying to say, you can't wear and drink wear the cool glasses and drink the Kool-Aid and be Warriors centric when there's just an opinion to offer up some other.
That's all it is.
Other opinions around why you think they went good and why you think they went bad. And look,
I think it's great.
After 6 weeks,
the more opinion, the better, because to me, it's just a big tapestry. Is all it is.
100%. After 6 weeks, we'll see. We'll talk about it then. Look, they're in the 8.
Yeah.
And I think the way that the competition's going, not just because the Warriors are in the 8, but the Bulldogs are at the top, the Tigers are in the 8 at the moment, and Canberra were meant to be on the bottom, and you've got Penrith down there.
All right, we've got a couple of other things to quickly cover. One of them, JWH is retired. He was going to England. It's obviously been
great bloke.
Too much for him. This is the thing. You've talked to me about him before. You've met him when he was a kid coming into the Kiwis, didn't you?
Great bloke. 2010, we brought him into the Kiwi side in Melbourne. He was the first bloke that showed up at the hotel, and back then the Kiwis were basically given what they got. You know what I mean? So you go and stay in the Ibis as opposed to the Sofitel. That type of mentality.
Okay. But if you don't know what he's talking about, it's about a 5-star to return. I
got the gig to run it, so I said, no, we're not staying in the Ibis, and we're definitely not staying in the Sofitel. We go in the next level. So we went into this. Mooks had a mate in Melbourne, and he ran this hotel. It was 6-star, 5-star. Jared Waerea-Hargreaves was the first bloke to walk through the door. Had been told about the Kiwis and how they stay in the Ibis, and he's a Māori boy from Rotorua, and he was just like, "Yeah, this is pretty cool, eh?" And me and him got on like a house of fire. Not just me and him, but every player in the team. Jared is the bloke that you pick in your team, even if his form is shit. You know what I mean? Because he is the team. I remember every night every team night we give the jersey away into the players. You know, like the final dinner before a test match. Jared would get up to get his jersey, and he would put on such a show. Like dance, you'd think, man, he's 130 kilos. He danced like he was 60 kilos.
Yeah. And
bounce around on the floor, and the boys would be clapping, and he'd be rocking everyone up. But that in itself was basically what he portrayed as a footballer as well. And I just read this morning that
larger than life.
Willie Peters, ex-halfback from St George, said, who's the coach of Hokkaido at the moment, said, and he summed it up really well. He said he'd probably go down as one of the greatest front rowers to come out of New Zealand, and I've got to agree with it.
Thank you so much, mate. Look forward to Brisbane.
So do I. Come on, the Warriors.
DSPN.